the selection for December for speakers is a little bit tough to come by. So, yeah, it was funny. One of the first times that I started coming to these, one of you guys out here had trouble remembering my name from being in the feed store, and they're like, "Chelsea's husband, tell us something about this." And so I like to remind everybody that's who I am. She has good looks and personality going for us. That's one thing she really has over me. But thanks for letting me do this. When Cheyenne originally asked for some help finding speakers and stuff, December being tough, we brought it, I mentioned it's easy to ask one of our nutritionists to do it. They're a lot smarter than us. But my boss, Ronnie, did a presentation over byproducts for Oklahoma State here about a month ago. There was some pretty interesting things in there that talked about the history, the process, and what actually affects supply and demand of byproduct feed. And so I just told her, I said, hey, I can kind of regurgitate it. So I took Ronnie's presentation, dumbed it down to something that I could say. But basically, corn's cheap. Why is feed so high? It's a question that everybody asks their feed supplier. That's the number one thing that seems like they're asking when they call in and talk to their salesman. A little bit hard to understand why these byproducts, or a lot of people refer to them as waste, why are they so expensive? I'm not here to predict what feed prices are going to do. I'm here to see if I can help enlighten you guys on what actually affects the demand of these products, or why these prices get inflated over corn or soybean meal in the market. So, number one, what is a byproduct? Something produced in a usually industrial or biological process in the process in addition to the principal product, or a secondary or sometimes unexpected or unintended results. So basically, when you're manufacturing product A, inadvertently you get product B. And product B is what we refer to as a byproduct, or a lot of people that we call in and say, well, that's just a waste. So these are a list of byproducts. I don't want to go through all of them because we'll be here forever. But these are a list of byproducts available in this area. This area being Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas, Texas, that we typically work. So where do these byproducts come from? One thing that I do want to talk about real fast is what are the processes to get the byproducts. So we process corn and milo, obviously for ethanol. That's where distillers grains come from. Process corn for high fructose corn syrup and sweeteners and soda pops and things like that. That's where we get corn gluten feed. Soybeans for meal and soy oil. That's where we get our soy hulls. Wheat for flour, obviously, that's where we get our wheat mitts. Sunflower for oil, sunflower meal pellets. Cottonseed, basically getting oil, we end up with mills and hulls. Sugar beets, we're after sugar, and we end up with beet pulp. But this is what they're after. So the people that are manufacturing these products, and we're ending up with our byproducts that we use out here in agriculture, this is not the money generator. This is the money generator for those processing facilities. So unless, and we'll talk more about this, but unless this is making money, they're not supplying this. So we use a lot of distillers in this industry, especially in the feedlot and dairy industry. When gas is cheap and they start shutting down these ethanol plants, there ain't very much of distiller's grain left. And you want to see Hereford, Texas go crazy. This summer they shut down they shut down Green Plains for about 3 months, and they shut down White Energy for cleanup and maintenance. And that world went nuts. It got very crazy out there in that market. Once again, as we refer to it, well, that's just waste. That's a byproduct, but it was a big part of what we do out in that part of the world. What influences byproduct feed prices? Supply and demand, and supply and demand. We just talked about that. Was if we are product A, what we're processing for, how much of it do we have, and what's the demand for it? But then we got the waste side, the byproduct. It also has supply and demand, mostly driven by agriculture for feedstuffs. So demand for primary product regulates the availability of the secondary product. Basically what I've been preaching here for the last 2 minutes. So primary products being oil, flour, ethanol, sweeteners. What affects this? Obviously just normal markets, our markets, and then imports and exports. How much are we bringing in? How much are we shipping out? Secondary products or byproducts, which are livestock feeds. Don't forget, we're not the only industry. The beef industry is not the only industry, but swine and equine also greatly affect what we're doing with our byproduct feeds. And then human consumption, some of our meals and things like that, we're still using those for food consumption. And then we export a lot of our byproduct feeds. Other things that affect byproduct feed is nutritional analysis. So out in the industry, when we talk about energy, there's always a standard for something. And corn is key. It always has been. I don't ever see it changing. But corn is what we set the value for energy on. So everybody's looked at it and said, well, let's look at it on a cost per unit of energy, which is simply just cost per ton divided by the net energy gain. One thing that's interesting in byproduct feed, because of a lot of it's digestible fiber, it's a great energy source for grass pastures and things like that. And so, but corn necessarily isn't. So for a lot of research in forage-based diets, especially moderate and poor quality, corn should be limited to 2 to 4 pounds per feeding, or 0.4% of body weight, due to negative effects on dormant pasture. So if you go to feeding, if you're trying to hit a protein intake, which no one does this with corn, but once you get past about 4 pounds of corn on dormant forage or moderate forage, you're actually negatively affecting digestion of that forage out on pasture. So what does that do to our byproducts now that do not negatively affect digestion? It gives them greater value. There's more nutritional value to them over corn past a 4 pound intake of corn. Multiple research reports have proven that many byproducts have similar energy values to corn, depending on the base diet, which would be forage diets, moderate to poor quality forages, which is what we're feeding on right now. Those products include distillers grains, gluten, soy hulls, and midds. Soybean meal, standard for protein. I don't know that I necessarily agree with this. I think it's a little bit antiquated, just with distillers grains coming on board. In ruminants and dairy, in my opinion, that is the standard for protein. A lot of merchandisers and ruminant nutritionists would agree with that. In swine and chickens, no, it's still bean meal. But if you're looking at trading hay, especially like alfalfa and things like that, when you're talking to a merchandiser, they'll take that back to cost per unit of protein against dry distillers grain, not bean meal. So I'll talk a little bit real quick about the different byproducts, where they come from. We'll start with distillers grains. So this is where all the ethanol plants are located. So basically Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas. Amazingly, they decided to stick most of these ethanol plants where they grow corn. Like I was talking earlier, when they shut down the ones in Hereford, located right here, this part of the world went nuts. I didn't know that thing could do that, touchscreen. So U.S. corn production overall, nothing a whole lot here, just saying, hey, this is our supply of corn, this is what we have in the United States to use. Obviously we had a dip here in the drought. Talk about, but what are we doing with our corn use? So ethanol production is here in the gray. Feed, mostly feedlots, growing rations, things like that. Manufactured feeds, what little bit we're using in those, are here in the green. So you can see that basically it's almost a 50-50 split of what we're using the U.S. corn for, with a little bit going for other uses. Overall, on average of total U.S. corn, we're using 37.5% for feed, and we're using 38.37% to make ethanol. This number also just keep rising as we increase mandates. So a little bit more corn used for ethanol than it is distillers grain. That surprise anybody? Couple nods. Things that affect these byproducts. You know, why are they higher than corn? What drives the value? So let's compare dry distillers grains. If we could figure out, we figured out how to feed distillers grain into a cube. We're having to pay a premium for it because that technology is very expensive to make it into a cube. But it really is. I mean, if you ask Cody Welshons or any other nutritionist, it's the best bang for your buck. It's 28 protein. It's 76 NEG value higher than corn. So here's corn, 65 NEG for corn, 76 for distillers grain. So a product that came from corn is better than corn for energy buy, and way better on a protein basis. And 60% of this is bypass protein, which is why the dairies like it. On bean meal, it's not quite the protein. Bean meal, call it 49 on a dry matter basis. 20 distillers grain comes in at 28%. This is the most interesting thing. DDGs, if you're fattening out cattle, or you're really wanting to put some gain on a set of steers, are 117% the value of corn for energy in growing diets. So whatever you're paying for corn, you can pay 117% more and get the same performance. And those are NRC values. I didn't inflate those. Part of the protein, maybe corn's cheap, and you have it or you own it, like we do up north. You get into Kansas and Missouri, where I work a lot up there. Those people, they own their corn. They have large elevators on the farm, or they have grain banks. Distillers isn't as important to them as an energy buy, but it's a really, really good buy against bean meal. When bean meal, it costs $450 a ton, and it's 57% the value. So up there where they're buying distillers $30 a ton to $40 a ton cheaper than you guys, they're buying it 160s when it's worth $240. It's a very good value. Just re-highlight just how awesome of a product those really are. Once again, if you look at that from a nutritional standpoint, you can see why distillers is high in compared to what we think it should be. Other indicators, export market, as you can see, Mexico, Vietnam, South Korea, Thailand, Turkey, Indonesia, Canada, who produces a lot of ethanol and a lot of distillers, still a very large importer of our product. So we do export a lot of this product. That's going to alter our supply, send more demand. Government mandates. If the government steps in and says we need more ethanol, it definitely will change our supply. Crude oil prices, where are those? How much do they want to turn on these ethanol plants? And then we affect DDG prices. We affect everything. When you look at prices where they were in midsummer to where they're now, they're about 30, 40 bucks a ton higher. And that's just through demand. Any questions on that? So corn gluten feed. Corn gluten is the part of the commercial shelled corn that remains after the extraction of the larger portion of the starch, gluten, and germ by the process employed in wet milling, manufacture of cornstarch and syrup. That's basically all you need to know. That's what they're after. They're after cornstarch and to make high fructose corn syrup. This is a good source of protein and energy for cattle. It's mostly a digestible fiber source, and we use a lot of it in range cubes. So all your 20% or 25%, they can use a certain percent of the formula, grind it back down, and put it into cubes. And it's utilized a lot in dairy and feedlot rations, especially in the Texas Panhandle, because we have a lot of rail access out there. Logistics is a huge part of what's driving supply and demand. And we have several unit car unloaders out there, which is 100 rail cars, that we can feed a lot of corn gluten out there. Energy value, 56, so still a good number, but significantly lower than corn, and 22% crude protein, which why it makes sense to put some manufactured feed. And we use a lot in blending facilities. Sounds like a pretty good feed that you would say, hey, we could feed a lot of that. We could probably feed a lot of that straight, right? It is high in sulfur, so you have to be careful where you feed it. Western Oklahoma, where they have a lot of jip water, is extremely high in sulfur, so you gotta be careful about how much you feed out there. But all in all, you look at it and you're like, that's a nice feed, let's feed a whole bunch of it.
What do we look for? What's the sulfur got to do with it? What happens?
Neurological thing.
Do what?
Neurological.
Yeah.
You have sulfur available in the rumen, it forms into hydrogen sulfide gas, they burp it out, then re-inhale it, and it causes necrosis in the brain. And then eventually it does the neurological.
You get wobbly, you know, the electron, that type of stuff.
Oh, way better answer.
If we feed the DDGs cubes,
No, if you feed excessive sulfur.
Right.
okay.
Not so
have
much
other-
not so much in particular individual product, but yeah, DDGs can be high in sulfur, it's just in excess. So if you try to use gluten or DDGs at, 100% of the diet.
Oh,
that
okay,
is-
all right. We got, West Oak, but we got jip water.
Yeah, that's where I'm from, Custer County, and we have to be careful about what we feed, because it's a jip water issue. But all in all, it looks like a pretty good feed. This is what we've done to high fructose cornstarch consumption. Most of America's on this health kick. Y'all can look at me. I am not on a health kick, but this is what has happened to our consumption. It's plummeted. What does that do to the supply of corn gluten feed? It gets tighter. We're not making a whole lot of it. The world says we no longer want to drink Pepsi. We no longer want to drink Coke. We're drinking water. This does put a crunch on how much corn gluten is available to the market. So production in tons, exports. The numbers really aren't important, but I wanted to show y'all in the last 4 years that we've crept up how much of corn gluten that we've exported out of this market. Also inflating the price. So foreign markets see the value of feeding a higher protein, higher energy source, and they come after it. Last fall, Europe opened up and they said, we're going to buy all the corn gluten they can. Our company, we like Tate Lyle corn gluten. It's a little bit better pellet. It's a little bit lower in protein. It only runs like a 20% protein, is that correct?
Yeah.
But just a little bit higher energy, just a little bit cleaner pellet. They basically said, we're not selling it domestic. They exported every bit of it. So we went into the fall going, what are we going to do for corn gluten? So some price indicators for you guys to be paying attention to is, when is peak demand? It's September through March. Obviously, this is when everybody here starts feeding their cows and supplementing. That's when our forage gets worse. Problem is, it's also right during corn harvest, so we are very dependent on how quick that corn crop can come out with how much supply is out there. Manufactured feed demand, if the cube facilities in Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas are buying up a lot of this gluten for other protein sources, that also affects how much can go as straight ingredient pricing. Export market, Ireland, Israel, Indonesia, United Kingdom, basically Europe are big players in the corn gluten market. For some reason we start drinking a lot of soda pop again. We'll have more corn gluten, but right now we see that declining. I think it's still going to keep putting pressure on this product. And logistics, rail and barge, waterways. Flour milling, a little bit more something that Oklahoma knows more about. We're more wheat farmers than we are corn farmers, so this is where all the little dots are where all the flour mills are. So basically, from the flour mills, we're after wheat middlings. I won't read the definition, but it is a decent source of protein and energy for cattle, another source of digestible fiber. But this is the big one. It is an excellent ingredient for pellet and cube manufacturing. We'll talk a little bit more about it in the next slide, but every ounce of cubes, pellets, I say every ounce, I bet most of the feed that y'all buy that's manufactured into a pellet or a cube has a high percentage of wheatness. It cubes really, really well. So basically it is a key ingredient in our area where all these pellet mills are and cube facilities. It has a significant lower energy value than corn or even corn gluten, but it does run at 18% protein, so you can see why if it cubes well, it's easy to grind down and make into another product, why it's nice to go ahead and make a 20% cube, because it's almost 20% protein in itself. You add a little bit of soybean meal and some other products, you got a really nice hard pellet. Our milling though, it's seasonal. So basically Thanksgiving and Christmas, when we're going through the holidays, we're making lots of pie crust, we're making lots of cookies, and Memorial Day and 4th of July, outdoor cooking, hamburgers, hot dogs, etc. Buns, bread, that's what they're after. So that's when they're gonna mill. They're gonna be ready for those seasons, and when those seasons are done, we don't typically mill when we don't have any demand for flour. So if we're not milling, there's no reason to produce it. So basically, once again, almost necessary in all livestock cube and pellet manufacturing. So protein supplements, 20% cubes. We talked about 50 to 70% of a 20% cube in a lot of these manufactured cubes is wheat mid pellets. Equine feeds, it's a major component of that, and carriers. So if there's anybody that has a TMR mixer box and you're getting a mineral supplement from another feed company like a High Plains or something like that, usually when they put that vitamin trace mineral pack and add whatever they want are going to add to it, they need to put that in a pellet. They got to use something that makes a good pellet. It's wheat mix. We export a lot of wheat, and then the one problem is, so if we only mill it at so many times of the year, they're going to make a whole bunch of it and they're going to stop until the next holiday. You would think, well, just make a whole bunch of it and store it. Well, wheat molds really bad. I'm sure everybody in this room knows this, and especially wheat mix. So if you're a feed company and you're trying to store this product, you got to be very careful about where you store it, how you store it, because it'll mold on you and it gets buggy. So I've always thought it was crazy just how much we use this as an industry, and it's a nightmare. Soybean crush. So once, just like corn, everything's back over here where they're growing all the soybeans and corn as well. So all that stuff's getting railed in or sent on a barge into our serviceable area. U.S. soybean production, we made a really nice climb coming out of the drought. 2019, we fell off. Anybody know what the cause of that is?
And floods in China.
Say that again.
Floods in China.
Yeah, pretty much. China is the big player. The floods was a little bit. A lot of it now is we actually had a better bean corn crop than what we thought. They're still having trouble getting it out of the fields. But China's the big player in that. Not trading to China really hurt. Made a lot of these guys decide, I'm not going to put in beans. So soy hulls consist primarily of the outer covering of soybeans. So this one's an interesting product because we utilize it a lot in this area and in Texas. But I pulled 3 different sources of energy values. And look at this. So Texas Tech, that puts out energy values that a lot of people use, it goes in Beef Magazine once a year. They call soy hull pellets at 52 NEG, but Oklahoma State actually calls it a 55. And Dairy One, anybody use Dairy One to send off feed analysis or anything like that. They have an excellent website you can get on there and look at. They basically have a database where you can pull up alfalfa in certain regions, and it'll tell you what that alfalfa protein energy averages in that area. So I pulled soy hulls from it. From a data analysis, they call it 32.1 net energy gain. There isn't anybody in the world that, if that was true, would buy this product. That truly would be a waste. So I went and pulled some research articles and stuff like that, and then basically what we find out is the nutritional value of soybean hulls is so heavily dependent upon the nature and composition of the diet that such standardized values are almost meaningless. So in research conducted at Kansas State, they basically said there's no way to come up with this value. It depends on what are the animals eating. Are they on dormant forage? Are they on excellent forage? Are they in feedlot diets? It all depends on what that energy value is. Okay, why is this product any good? Doesn't make sense. If we can't figure out what it is, why would we feed it? First thing I want to point out is this is not all the research trials, but there are multiple people that have tested this out. But the results of several beef cattle studies clearly demonstrate that soybean hulls are comparable to corn as an energy source for beef cattle that are grazing low and moderate quality forages. Basically, dormant forages, hay, low quality forages, growing cattle just like what we typically do, utilizing some cheap refuges and mixer boxes, a moderately or a heavily foraged diet, soy hulls are equal to corn. So if you look at these values and it says that it's worth 70% the value of corn at best, you think you're going to pay 70% the value of corn. But no thanks to Nebraska, Oklahoma State, Texas A&M, and everybody else, they said it's at least worth the value of corn. And we've already figured out earlier, you can only feed so much corn in a foraged diet. So now you're limited on corn. So what does that do again when you maxed out corn and you still need more energy in the diet? You just added more dollars to this byproduct. Availability of soy hulls depends on the soybean meal production, mostly driven by swine and poultry business. Soybean crush efficiency. I found this, so basically we're using soy hulls right after harvest. We're still harvesting beans. Crush is going really, really slow, and it has driven bean prices up, or soy hull prices up currently. They're having a hard time getting out of the field. It's slow processing. But I found this really interesting. 2.5 to 3.5 pounds of soybean hulls come from 1 bushel of soybeans. So there's 60 pounds per bushel of soybeans. So that's roughly about 5% of that bean makes soy hull pellets. I thought that was pretty impressive. That's an efficient little bean. Soybean markets, what affects it? Export, U.S. dollar. So what's really affecting soy hulls is bean meal. And I mean, there's some supply issue, but U.S. dollar, are we trading bean meal into other foreign markets? China, and then Brazil. Producers of soybeans, if they have a bumper crop, ours is going to go down in price. If they don't, ours is going to go up. Crude oil prices, and then corn production. Are you going to plant corn, or are you going to plant beans? Because if you looked at the map earlier, we kind of only grow beans in one area. So you kind of got to make a decision what you're going to plant that time of year. And then obviously logistics. Logistics plays a role in everything that we do. Cottonseed crush. This was the one that we get phone calls constantly. Everybody always says, you guys need that good cottonseed cake. That's what you need. My dad used to feed cottonseed cake. The fat would bleed out of the paper sacks. Well, I showed y'all the maps of soy hull crush here, ethanol, DDGs, all over the place. This is all of your cotton crush facilities. All 5 of them for the United States. Those are the only ones running. How do you think that affects the ingredients needed to make that good cottonseed cake. No one's gonna pay that value. It just isn't there. So everybody says, well, look at all the cotton we're growing in this part of the world. I mean, we've increased cotton production across Oklahoma. When I was a kid, you wanted to go see cotton, you went to Altus. And now it's all over the place. I grew up in Arapahoe and Clinton. The only reason why I thought that we had the cotton gin was because that's where it filled up with gas. I didn't know what else it did. But just because we increased cotton production, this is what we've done to whole cottonseed crush. Drastically down. So, cottonseed meal and hull is basically what we're wanting. This byproduct. Product is derived from the whole cottonseed crush. Cottonseed crush, they're after mostly the oil. That's the price driver. Not cottonseed meal, not hulls. It's the oil. That's what they're after. That's the only reason why they're going to turn on that plant. Why is it down? Mostly, the oil's not heart healthy. We're using it for cooking. It's higher in saturated fats, less omega-3 fatty acids. And there's other alternatives out there: canola, sunflower, safflower. The people are in consumption. Go ahead.
Oh, you.
I thought you were raising your hand.
Well, I am, but is that for animals, or does that bother our cows too, like it does us?
Man, I'm a salesman. You better ask the nutritionist.
So ruminants, they biohydrate, so more or less the rumen takes any kind of fatty acid that comes into it and tries to make it into the same one going out. So as long as you don't, if we're not just drastically overfeeding, the rumen can convert anything that's unsaturated to a saturated fatty acid.
Really?
And so when it goes and gets put into their body stores, it isn't necessarily the fatty acid profile that you fed. Versus like swine, for example, if you feed too much distillers grains to swine, it's all that unsaturated fatty acid and you get soft bellies because they don't convert it. Ruminants do. So what you put in doesn't necessarily equal what they put down in the body.
Thank you. Behind, I guess.
So that's what's happened to why that good cottonseed cake's not around anymore. Oil's not worth as much, so we're not getting a byproduct to start making these. Cottonseed meal values compared to soybean meal, also kind of like what you just described. We really only use cottonseed meal in ruminants. It's not a valuable source in swine and poultry, horses. As far as whole cottonseed, we do have a lot of it. It's not quite making it to crush facilities. A lot of people take advantage of trying to feed it on the farm. There's some new boxes that sit on the back of pickups. I think Dewey's has got one supposed to feed it. But we are going to compete very much with dairies and feedlots. This is a very, very sought after product in that sector. And roughage, values, everybody loves starting cattle on loose cottonseed hulls. It's always requested when we're building rations. You look at some of the manufactured feed, as far as the textured feed, they have loose hulls in it. It's a very high value product. But as we showed you on the map, it's just not a whole lot of it being made, unfortunately. So to wrap this up, what can this group do, even though we have byproducts out there, how can we take advantage of them? What are some things, some key factors that this group can look at every month of the year to say, hey, I need to protect myself as far as feed costs? One, the U.S. grain production reports, pay attention to them. You don't have to be very analytic to look at them, but you can get the gist of what's going on. I think this summer we probably learned a little bit of a lesson when the corn reports came out and TIL came out, and we all said, bull crap. And we were wrong. The corn was there. It wasn't quite the crop we've had in the last 2 years, but the corn was there. That's why corn's in 370, 380 today. obviously, just what y'all do all the time. Farm, pasture conditions, forage supply, livestock body conditions, be planning ahead. Your cows look thin now. Let's go ahead and let's put some weight on them early in the summer, so we're not trying to put it on them with dormant forage. It's gonna be cheaper for you to do it with your grass than it is to buy feed from somebody. U.S. and world markets. What's corn, soybeans, crude oil, U.S. dollar. Anybody know why the dollar matters? If we have a relatively high dollar value compared to the rest of the world, it takes more of their money to buy our product. So that's a big, big indicator. When I was in the feed yard, when I managed a feed yard, that number and that number is what I watched every time that I was going to contract my corn basis for a quarter. That was the biggest tip for me because it helped me. Because the problem was wet distillers, I don't know if it changed, but they would only let me buy a 30-day supply. And that's how I managed how much corn. If I felt like we had a strong U.S. dollar, no one's going to come in here and buy a bunch of our distillers grains. I would plan on my diets being higher in wet distillers than they did corn. We had a weak U.S. dollar, they're going to buy a lot of DDGs. I was planning on higher corn, less DDGs in the diet, and I compensated for that. And then obviously, just where are we overall in our stock market, the health of our economy. World economy, world corn crop, Brazil's a big one, Argentina, Russia, what's the world producing for grains? The next one is probably the one that's most practical, is who is buying. So when you're calling in and you're talking to your feed supplier or your feed salesman and you are curious about contracting feed or pricing feed, ask them what they're doing for their ingredients. You know, if they tell you, we're trying to lock in everything we can, we're buying right now, it's probably a pretty good indicator that you need to be buying too. If it's a startup company, yeah, you might second guess them. If they're a proven if Cargill is buying their ingredients, they're a lot smarter than me. If they're buying their ingredients, I'm probably going to buy too. Something's going on. Don't be afraid to ask us or, you know, even Apache Farms Co-op. Those guys are really in tune with the market. Don't be afraid to ask them, hey, what are you doing? Are y'all contracting feed? I'm not saying that you should, but it's a great indicator of where is this market going. Trust your salesperson and feed supplier. I know that sounds funny, but they get paid on retention. It doesn't matter who they work for, whether it's Stillwater Mills, Allberg, Big Feed, Livestock Nutrition Center. If you have a salesman that you're working with, if you quit them every year and they constantly have to go find new business, they're getting fired. That's how the world works. If my customer base quits me, I'm getting fired. So I'm going to give my producers the best information that I have available so that they come back to do business with me. Trust your salespeople. Risk management options. Obviously, especially in a stocker operation, but even cow-calf, number one cost to cattle production is feed cost. So take advantage of contracting, hedging. If you have the capabilities of inventory, putting up lots of silage, lots of hay, take advantage of those. Try to think some others, I'm sure there's some more. And then the last one that I have, utilize your resources and proven scientific research. So if you utilize a nutritionist, you're using a lot of mixer boxes or something like that, you got a nutritionist that you like to use, those people are educated. Once again, they get paid on retention. They're doing the best that they can. They're going to use proven scientific research. That's how we figured out soy hulls had the value of corn and forage diets. And then another one, I kind of stole this from a customer of mine. But your granddad was a pioneer. But don't confuse that with being a traditionalist. Everybody says, hey, I'm going to do it just like my granddad. He done it this way, my dad did it this way, I'm going to do it this way. More than likely, your granddad was one of the first people that started doing that. be just like him. If you want to be like your granddad, then be an innovator. Stay on the cutting edge of science and technology.
Cool.
That's it. Any more questions?
This may be more of a nutritionist type question, but for the people close enough to be able to use the liquid product, is there more of the liquid used than there is the dried, as far as like up further north where their transportation isn't a factor? Or which is, they're basically equal in value, are they not? The liquid's cheaper?
From a nutritional point, yeah, I would lean on someone else, but from a supply, so all of your molasses supply, most of that's going to be up north where beets and stuff like that are produced, and that manufacturing's happening, so they would have more readily use of it. And then along the coast, because they're shipping it down to or importing it from other countries into the Houston area. I think Westway is the largest producer of liquid feeds. I could be wrong, but you know they have a huge manufacturing facility down there on the port in Houston. So as far as logistically, no, there's no advantage. Nutritionally, yeah, I would let Cody fall on that. The one thing that I would tell you from a nutritional standpoint, a lot of it has to do with what is the dry matter of that liquid, because there's some products out there that'll be in the 50% dry matter, and yeah, they look cheaper. They're in the $200 range, and then you get a product that's in the $300 range, but it's 65% dry matter. Yeah, that 65% dry matter is a lot cheaper product.
There's no magic ingredient necessarily if it's valued correctly.
So it seems like transportation is obvious. The biggest thing on the west, and like Ronnie was saying, if it wasn't within 60 miles of a feedlot, they tended to prefer the dry.
Home water is expensive.
Mm-hmm. You know, you mentioned logistics. I meant to bring this up, but one thing that happened to us, we brought up waterways, is this summer, you mentioned flooding. We have a barge facility in Kyoto, Oklahoma, and that facility this summer went basically 100% truck bound. I don't remember how many barges were stuck up north, but it was an unreal amount of feed that was setting just north of us, and we couldn't get to it, so we had to truck in every ingredient to make for these customers. Spot prices got really, really high, and we lost a lot of money on contracted feed, but that was a point at which, yeah, logistics really, really hurt us. Not to mention, I think when they weighed them barges, they ACH'd us right off our account. We didn't see them for 6 months. So, any more questions? Well, I'm either a really boring speaker or very, very, very detailed. So, thank you guys.